Wow, Zionism. Such an uncontroversial topic. Very calm, very relaxed. Just hearing this word probably triggered strong feelings in you, good ones or bad ones. But today I want to step outside of all this tension, outside the emotion, the current war, and the rising animosity. Full disclosure, I am a shameful, proud Zionist. So let me present to you my philosophical case for Zionism. 1. What is Zionism? Here comes the boring yet so important part of all my arguments, the definition of the terms. So what is Zionism after all? Many think that we, Zionists, are Jews who greedily want to expand their land. But come on, we're not just that. Just in case that was a joke for anyone who took me seriously. So let's see what Wikipedia has to say. Zionism is an ethno-cultural nationalist movement that emerged in Europe in the late 19th century that aimed to establish and maintain a national home for the Jewish people, pursued through the colonization of Palestine, a region roughly corresponding to the land of Israel in Judaism, with central importance in Jewish history. Zionists wanted to create a Jewish state in Palestine, with as much land, as many Jews, and as few Palestinian Arabs as possible. Wait, what? That is not Zionism at all. First of all, it is not colonization. Second of all, it wasn't Palestine, as in the sense of an Arab state. And thirdly, Zionists didn't want as much land and as few Arabs as possible. What on earth is going on there? When I saw that, I was shocked. Wikipedia is usually solid, and I swear that this isn't what I used to see a few years ago. I mean, I gave them $50 once, so please give me my money back. To be sure, here's what I did. I went into the page's history. First, we can see that there are more than 500 updates in the past few months. That's huge compared to other pages, and even compared to this same page before October 7th. It is more than 2,000 updates that were made since October 7th. Okay, but I'm getting lost. What I wanted was the last version before the war started. Let's look at it. Zionism is a nationalist movement that emerged in the 19th century to espouse the support for the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine, region roughly corresponding to the land of Israel in Jewish tradition. Following the establishment of Israel, Zionism became an ideology that supports the development and protection of the state of Israel. Yeah, that's better. I mean, not perfect, but still better. No wonder that there is a rise of anti-Semitism with the distortion that we see now. This is a clear manifestation of the ideological war that is going on, beyond the actual war. So, let's get things straight. What really is Zionism? For that, we need a bit of a history lesson. But before we dive in history, consider subscribing, giving a like, or more importantly, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you think, and your feedback helps me sharpen future arguments. 2. A brief history of the Jews in Israel. To understand Zionism, we first need to understand the connection between the Jews and this land. But before we dive in, it's important to note that Zionism is different from political Zionism. Political Zionism refers to, well, the political movement that sought to create a state of Israel in the late 19th century. But Zionism, in its deeper sense, is the connection between the Jews and their ancestral homeland. I often hear from so-called neutral journalists that Jews see this land as the promised land, pursuing a messianic vision. So this isn't entirely wrong, as religious Jews do believe in this messianic prophecy, but it really misses the core point of Zionism. See, political Zionism was a largely secular movement rooted in national identity and free of any religious belief. So, a natural question is, why did the Jews precisely want a state in the land of Israel if they didn't have any religious claim at all? Well, this is because Israel is the birthplace of the Jewish nation, as I will present now. So, once again, what I'm going to say isn't grounded in religious belief. It is grounded on historical document and archaeological findings. I encourage you to check out anything that I say here. The ancient Jewish presence in Israel has more than 3 millennia. The first external reference to Israel appears on the Merneptah stele, an Egyptian inscription from around 1208 BCE. Clearly mentioning a people called Israel that were already settled in the region. A few hundred years later, in the 10th century BCE, tradition holds that the 12 tribes of Israel united under a single kingdom, ruled by Saul, David, and Solomon. The grandeur of this kingdom is debated among scholars, but its existence is quite likely. The kingdom was then split into two successor kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. These two kingdoms are well attested both by the Bible and by external sources like Assyrian and Babylonian records. You will actually notice that the word Jew precisely comes from Judah or Judea, which is the region. The kingdom of Israel in the north was destroyed in 722 BCE, leading to the partial exile of its population. The kingdom of Judah survived longer until it fell in 586 BCE to the Babylonians, which destroyed the first temple and conquered Jerusalem. Many Judeans exiled to Babylon, marking the beginning of the Judean exile. After the Persian conquest, Jews were allowed to return back to Israel, and they rebuilt the temple, marking the start of what's known as the Second Temple period, which lasted until the Romans destroyed it in 70 CE. In 132 CE occurred the Bar Kokhba revolt, a major Jewish revolt caused by Roman repression of Jewish practices, including the ban of circumcision and the renaming of Jerusalem as Aelina Capitolina, a Roman city. The repression was crushed by the Roman Emperor Adrian. He then renamed the region Judea to Syria Palestina and banned Jews from entering Jerusalem. This was the beginning of the Second Exile. Jews went all over Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. So you can see that the Jews are really indigenous to this land. It is not a biblical belief. They had kingdoms there for centuries with its culture, temples, courts, etc. So let's now see what happens for nearly 2000 years of exile. How did the Jews evolve? Did they assimilate? Did they keep their language, culture? Did they plan to go back to Israel? Did they separate into different peoples, different religions? This is what we'll explore next. 3. A brief history of diaspora. After the fall of Jerusalem and the Roman ban on the Jewish presence, the central institutions of the Jewish life were dismantled in the region. Over the course of centuries, many Jews left the region, not because of a single expulsion, but due to a long process of Roman repression, economic hardship, religious persecution, and the growing strength of the Jewish communities in the diaspora. Yet, despite all this, a continued presence of Jewish life remained in the region. For example, around 200 CE, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi compiled the Mishnah in the Galilee. The Mishnah is the foundational written version of the oral Torah, complementing the written Torah received from Sinai. And by the way, the term diaspora corresponds to the dispersion or spread of a people from their original homeland. So, the very use of the term diaspora already shows the connection of the Jews to the land. They didn't just move to someplace else, forgetting their past. They considered themselves displaced and were waiting to return home. After all, it wasn't the first time that they were displaced. As we saw in 586 BCE, they were already exiled from their land, and after 50 years, when Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, they were allowed to return home. That memory of return became a model. Even after Roman persecution, many still hope of restoration. Fast forward a few centuries to see the Jews wandering the world. They established great communities in North Africa, Middle East, and Europe. But then came the question of assimilation. Did the Jews melt in their local population? Did they at least take their culture? The answer to these questions depends on where the communities were. But first, I need to say that the Jews in diaspora were always a minority among a bigger population. Also, Judaism has never been a missionary religion. Converts exist, of course, but the process is much harder than, say, for Islam or Christianity. And it is initiated by the converts, not by outreach. In fact, tradition requires that a would-be convert be turned away multiple times. Not to exclude him, but to ensure his sincerity. So all this to say that Judaism was never imposed on other people. In many cases, Jews were legally or socially segregated, which forced them to build strong internal structures, like synagogues, courts, schools, or charity networks that sustained them across many generations. Take the example of Jewish life in Poland and Lithuania. During the Middle Ages and the modern period, Jews were legally segregated from Christian society, but rather than collapse, Jewish life adapted, organized. They built kehilot, internal Jewish communities, with their own courts, Beit Din, schools, cheder and yeshivot, synagogues, and charity systems. Notice that these institutions weren't just religious, they were civic. The kehila collected taxes, settled disputes, educated children, cared for the poor. Over the generations, they developed a distinct culture, complete with its own language, Yiddish, a fusion of medieval German, Hebrew, and Slavic languages, written in Hebrew script. They composed their own music, folklore, legal traditions, and even philosophy. Entire towns, shtetls, functioned as semi-autonomous entities. In a world that rejected them, Jews built parallel societies, rich in law, learning, solidarity, and resilience. It is precisely this internal infrastructure that allowed the Jews to survive for centuries of marginalization and carry their identity across exile after exile. That's actually the world captured in the movie Fiddler on the Roof. Even during so-called golden ages for Jews like Hellenistic Alexandria, Islamic Spain, medieval Baghdad, or post-Enlightenment Western Europe, Jews weren't accepted as full citizens and pogroms were still occurring. Under Islamic rules, at best they were considered dhimmis, a second-class citizen. Under Christianity, they were considered as a deicidal people, blamed for the death of Jesus. And even after the Enlightenment, Jews were seen as outsiders, as people from elsewhere. This is where the term anti-Semitism comes from. It was coined in the late 19th century by German journalist Wilhelm Marr. He opposed Jews not for their religions, but from ethnic and racial grounds. Even the most assimilated Jews that developed their own philosophy, like Spinoza, Freud, Marx, Husserl, or Wittgenstein, were always seen as different individuals, as part of something else. And just as a side note, when the Nazis came to power, it became very clear that religion wasn't the center of their concern. It was race. For example, Husserl, that I just cited, was baptized in 1886, decades before, but it didn't matter to the Nazis, and he had to resign from his academic position. And before the Nazis, among other, there was the Dreyfus affair in France, in which Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer, was falsely accused of passing secrets to the enemy, Germany. He was convicted of treason beside flimsy evidence and clear sign of forgery. The military and much of the public insisted that he was guilty. Why? Well, because he was Jewish. So, faced with all this, Jews began wondering, where do we belong? Some believed that assimilation was the key, and we just had to try more even if we had to renounce our religion, our culture, our language. But others saw things differently. They thought that no matter how hard we tried, we would always be seen as the Jew, as the other. So they flipped the question, what if instead of hiding it, we began to fully embrace it and build something of our own? We called them the political Zionists, and their leader was a certain Theodor Herzl. They didn't just think of Zionism as a philosophical idea, but wanted to make it concrete. It was the end of the 19th century, and they dreamed big. They wanted to regain control of their life completely, and finally be the master of their own destiny. For that, they needed a state, and to build everything there. Schools, fields, homes. And where could this state be? I wondered. Of course it had to be in Israel. This is where it all started, where the very name Jew comes from. So I won't go into the full history of modern Zionism, because it would take hours, but I will just say one thing. It was no easy job. Literally everybody had a say in this, and the big powers wanted to be sure to have their interests respected in the matter. Yet, somehow, despite all odds, it happened. On May 14th, 1948, the State of Israel was finally declared.
עומד בזכות עצמו במדינתו הריבונית. אשר תפתח לרווחה את שערי המולדת לכל יהודי ותעניק לעם היהודי מעמד של אומה שוות זכויות בתוך העמים.
The dream of an entire nation became true. So, with what I just said, I clarified a common misconception that the State of Israel was created just because of the Holocaust. Political Zionism predates the Holocaust by at least half a century, and the idea of returning to the land is as old as we are in exile. The only thing that the Shoah did was to make the great nations more sympathetic to the Zionist cause. But from the Jewish side, the idea was there long before. And actually, modern Zionism wasn't the first attempt to return home. It was simply the most successful and the last one. But before that, hundreds, if not thousands, of Jews came back to the land, mostly from religious devotion and without any coordinated vision for building a sovereign state. I hope that you're still here, because it's now time for diving in the defense of Zionism. 4. A philosophical case for Zionism. So, for now I was mainly doing some storytelling. But as good philosophers, let's lay out the case like real logicians. P1. Each nation, people, has a right to self-determination. P2. The Jews constitute a people. C1. Therefore, the Jews have a right to self-determination. P3. The Jews couldn't attain self-determination in the diaspora. P4. Israel is the one and only place for the Jews to attain self-determination. C2. Therefore, the Jewish people have a right to self-determination in the land of Israel. Okay, this one is a bit more tricky than in my previous videos because it has two conclusions, but don't worry, we'll take it step by step. Let's actually leave P1 aside for a moment because it is a normative statement, so a bit more tricky than the other premises, which are historical and empirical. For now, we'll just grant P1. P2. The Jews constitute a people. This is one of the most misunderstood facts about the Jews. We are not a religion, or at least in the same way as Islam or Christianity. Being Jewish is first and foremost about belonging to a collective, a nation, a people. To prove that, do you know how you become a Christian, a Muslim, or a Jew? It's very different. You're a Muslim if your dad is a Muslim, but you remain Muslim if you believe in a Muslim faith, that there is one God, Allah, and that Muhammad is his prophet. You're a Christian if you're baptized, which is a covenant with God. But you're Jewish if your mom is Jewish, except for converts, but I'll come back on that. That is it. That means that you can fully reject God later in life, or even convert to another religion and still be considered Jewish. An atheist Jew makes perfect sense. There are a lot, actually. But on the contrary, a Muslim atheist is an inherent contradiction. And no, this isn't a liberal modern interpretation. This is the Orthodox position. Ask a rabbi. In fact, this is what Orthodox rabbis say when asked the question if a Jew who becomes an atheist remains a Jew.
אז האם יהודי יכול, שלא מאמינים בכלל, אתאיסט, לא מאמין, הוא עדיין יהודי?
בוודאי שהוא עדיין יהודי.
אתה יהודי? כן. אז אתה אח? אחינו כל בית ישראל. זה מפריע לי שאח שלי ככה נראה. שהוא לא מאמין.
אני עדיין יהודי?
כן.
אוקיי. איך אני יכול להיות יהודי אם אני לא מאמין?
יהודי זה שאלה של לאום.
אוקיי.
Why does it matter? Because being Jewish isn't just about belief, it is about belonging. It's about peoplehood. And we can see that even at the genetic level. Despite nearly 2,000 years of exile, Jews from very different places, Sephardic Jews from North Africa and Spain, and Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, share a common ancestry. That is remarkable when you think about it. These communities were separated for so long, yet the link still remains. And yes, modern genetics also confirms what Jewish traditions has always said, that we have roots in the Middle East. That doesn't mean that there weren't some mix-ups in the diaspora. Of course there were. But it means that the core is still connected to each other and to the ancient Israelites. However, of course, this is just a small part. A people is defined by much more than just genetics. We also share a religion, Judaism, a language, Hebrew, and a distinct culture, one shaped by centuries of rituals, customs, and values. For example, Jews have a long-standing emphasis on debate, learning, and literacy. Jewish culture also tends to emphasize intergenerational bonds, close and big families, and community responsibility. Oh, and what about converts? Remember them? How can they join a people if they just have a religious conversion? Well, actually, this is what a convert says during his or her conversion. Amecha, ami, ve'eloaich, Eloi. This means your people is my people and your God is my God. Notice the order: first people, then God. And once again, this is the Orthodox position. It even comes from the Bible itself and the first converts, Ruth. I think that this is more than enough for being called a people. And this is crucial to the Jewish question. I remember that back in high school, a friend of mine asked me once, why do Jews need a country? After all, Christians don't have one. At the time, I didn't really know what to say, but now I do. Christianity and Judaism are very different by nature. One is about a universal religion, trying to englobe as many nations as possible, and the other is about a collective, the Israelites and their destiny in time. P3. The Jews couldn't attain self-determination in the diaspora. P4. Israel is the one and only place for the Jews to self-determine. I won't come back on these 2 points because I feel like they were already treated in the previous section or in a previous video if you're watching the short form. Jews, to say the least, didn't have an easy life in the diaspora and could never fully be themselves. The only moment in history where the Jews had full control over their destiny, where Jewish culture thrived without restriction, were when they had full autonomy in their own land. Let's now come back to P1. P1. Each nation, people, has a right to self-determination. This is a cornerstone of modern political thought, particularly in the 20th century. It is rooted in Enlightenment ideas and collective agency, influenced by thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, with his idea of general will, and John Stuart Mill, who argued that a people with shared culture or language should be able to govern themselves. It is later explicitly articulated by US President Woodrow Wilson after World War I. National aspirations must be respected. People may now be dominated and governed only by their own consent. The idea is that each nation have their own aspirations, so they should be able to have a place to live according to their wish. Of course, this concept is a bit vague because first we can wonder what constitutes a people, and then we can also wonder if individuals or groups within a nation want the same thing. Take Iran, for example. It clearly constitutes a people with shared history, culture, and language. At the same time, there is a clear division between the state, which is a terrorist Islamic government, and large part of the population who wants to live according to a more modern lifestyle, like before the Islamic Revolution of 1979. We might also ask, can different peoples coexist in the same state if they share common morality? This is the idea of the United States of America. You have people from different nations, from different colors, from different religions, but they all live in the same place, and at least in theory, if they share a common idea of justice and morality, it all works out. This is what we call multiculturalism. And finally, there is the problem of when two nations claim the same territory. This challenge is evident in the Israeli-Arab conflict, but we can also take the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is composed of 3 ethnic groups: Bosniak, who are Muslim, Croats, who are Catholics, and Serbs, who are Christian Orthodox. They somehow managed to make it even more complicated than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Really, congrats. So, maybe this is the most controversial premise, but it still remains largely valid. Throughout the diaspora, Jews were never fully free or safe. At best, they had restrictions, and at worst, they had pogroms. Having a state of their own meant dignity, safety, and the ability to live according to their traditions and their religion. From all this, conclusion 1 and then 2 follow naturally. And this is why the modern Zionists wanted to re-establish a state in Israel. So, no, Wikipedia. Zionism isn't colonization. It is a return of an indigenous population to its ancestral homeland. And no, Zionism wasn't about having as much land and as few Arabs as possible. The mainstream Zionist movement aimed for a Jewish state in the ancestral homeland. A few envisioned broader borders, but the majority wanted political realism and coexistence. And by the way, the ancestral homeland was roughly the size of New Jersey. And despite what some say, the goal was Jewish self-determination. In its philosophical essence, the Arab question was really orthogonal. Of course, in practice, the two claims eventually collided, and that required difficult compromises, which Zionist leaders were often much more willing to make. Here is what Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, said on the day of the Declaration of Independence in 1948. The State of Israel will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespectively of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions and will be faithful to the principle of the Charter of the United Nations. 5. Recap and conclusion. Time for a recap. First, apart from the argument, we saw that there is an ideological war happening on Wikipedia and, of course, elsewhere. I really encourage each one of you to obtain a black belt in critical thinking and always try to seek for the best arguments of both sides of a debate. This includes me. Never take anything I say for granted. Check my source and tell me if I got anything wrong. That kind of intellectual honesty is crucial. Okay, then we actually dove in the real argument. We saw that Israel is the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, its birthplace. It's where their institutions, kingdom, sacred traditions, and also rebellions began. Then I briefly went over the history of the Jews in the diaspora and their connection to the land of Israel. We saw that the Jews were always seen as alien to any places they went, never fully integrating, and at worst, being victims of pogroms and evictions. This forced them to build strong internal communities, but they never forgot where they come from. Every year we say in Passover dinner, next year in Jerusalem. And have you ever wondered why Jews break a glass in Jewish weddings? Well, this is to remember the destruction of the Second Temple, a reminder of what we lost, even in our happiest moments. After that, I walked you through the philosophical case for Zionism. It starts by acknowledging the fact that the Jews do constitute a people, that their one and only home was the land of Israel, and that anywhere else they weren't able to thrive and assume fully their Jewishness at the same time. I also took the stance of the self-determination of each nation, a foundational idea of modern politics and a goal clearly stated in the United Nations Charter, Article 1.2. To develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. I'll end with one story from a guide I know in Israel. He told me that he was once explaining the concept of Aliyah to a non-Jew, basically the process for a Jew to immigrate to the state of Israel. He added that the state of Israel will even pay you the flight to come and settle. He then added, but of course they only pay you the departure flight. The man then responded, no, they pay you the return flight.